You heard the internet, lady Cecilia.
Yeah.
We're now talking. We're talking to the internet.
Yeah. Like good vibe.
Yeah, exactly.
Super
Yeah, this
electronic timber. It's like, okay, all right.
you're exactly. Cybertron wants to alert us that the thing that we're doing is totally normal now. Hmm, hmm. So we're talking about Regens Unite, and the cool thing that you're going to do at Regens Unite, in hopefully to give folks some surface area of the cool shit that's going to happen there, and that people that vibe with the stuff that you're going to do feel like showing up and adding their piece of the puzzle into the mix. So, what are you doing?
Hi, I'm Cecilia. I'm an applied anthropologist, and I will be running a workshop on collaborative ethnography for supporting regenerative communities. Yeah, that's basically my aim, let's say.
Word. And so when you say collaborative ethnography, I have that there's a game I play with these things, liberating structures. And so there's a game that we have that's simple ethnography, which is just mostly about just documenting observable data, right? What do you see, hear, and notice that happens in the environment? So when you say collaborative ethnography, what does that mean?
Okay, like everything starts from ethnography, which is basically a method that which is like quite widely used by anthropologists, and it's a specific way of looking and observing reality that surrounds us in order to detect and identify, let's say, a cultural blueprint that is beyond reality that compose our reality. So when I say collaborative, of course, it's something that we all do collectively. But the cool thing to me, it just basically there will be some exercises for leveraging the reality that we normally observe with some eyes, and we're gonna try to observe it with another point of view, which I think it's basically like the main support of anthropology in general to community. And more than that, it's gonna be like some social constructive practices that we're gonna share all together. And the nice thing is when I say social constructive, it means that basically what we are doing is social constructing the reality that surrounds us to understand it. And to me, it's really empowering somehow because on one side, it's gonna gives you some element in order to transform reality because you look at reality not as it was given, but you're gonna look at it as someone before you already started to build up that reality. So
Hmm.
basically, it's gonna give to the local community or also to the participant a way of looking at reality for transforming it.
Hmm.
And in order to understand that there are many potential ways for doing things.
Hmm. So there's a couple things that bounce for me there, right? So first and foremost is that general notion that like if you want to understand a system, you have to change it. And if you want to change a system, like find a way to enable it to observe and sense itself, right? And so what you're describing seems like both that observing and sensing portion, but there's also in the way you describe this sort of construction, it also sounds like there is a little bit of a invocation, or what are you doing to also build up the space that you want people to sense into? Are you just sort of doing that in whatever in the container that we provide as far as Regens Unite, or is there like a type of way that you're inviting people into a thing in order to sense?
First of all, we're gonna base on our senses there at the workshop directly in the reality we will be living. So basically, there will be some observative exercises in order to understand our surroundings, but also there is kind of an invitation of understanding that basically when we are in an environment, there are plenty of ways
Yes.
for making sense of that environment.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we're gonna identify and detect our senses in that environment. And starting first of all with a, let's say, um, try to empowering our listening muscles, in the sense that we have to leverage a little bit on our stereotypes that we have before
Mm.
doing whatever things in our life. But it's really important to be reflexive with these stereotypes. So communicating those stereotypes that prevent you from listening the reality that surrounds you, and that are also sometimes necessary in order to understand information that surround you in a quick way. But sometimes we can maybe doing some little games in order to trying to understand that we have a lot of stereotypes, and maybe play within those in order to understand that we have a, yeah, like we are kind of sharing the same reality altogether. But reality cannot be, the reality we are living is not the only one, let's say.
Mm.
So there is a multi-potential of transforming things, transforming also stereotypes.
Mm.
So
Dope,
that would be
dope,
the
dope.
first part of the workshop.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's hmm. So I like that. It sounds like what you're trying to activate is like this sort of third person perspective to enable me as an individual to see not only like what I see, but the act of seeing myself see, so that I can maybe see some of the frames and lenses through which I'm looking, that I may not normally be aware of.
Yeah, and that's the first step you need to do in order to understand what observation is in anthropology, and that's the main contribute also of anthropology, to regenerative communities. So to understand your environment and in being kind of in equilibrium with your environment and start to perceive it as a system. But then at the same time, you like it's always like, I don't know, it's kind of funny to me, and that's why I also like wanted to focus on the second part of the workshop, more on the collective imaginary. The fact that a lot of times we share a lot of images all together, so started to work and to bridge up with the other people in order to understand what is a regenerative communities for us, in order also to make sense of the place we will be living in Regens Unite.
Mm-hmm. So what I get is that what I think about is this like um this multi-perspectival shift, right? Where I can see from we basically compare maps in some way, right? So I get to get you what the things that are most salient and relevant for you, like when I can include those in my map, and you can include those things in your map, and we can do that sort of together as a group, then we end up with like this super giga high fidelity map of reality that individually is pretty much impossible. But as soon as we start talking about the things that are going on and really apparent to us, like to me, of course, that's why should I even say that out loud? But as soon as I say it out loud, it helps bring not only that aspect into focus, but also might be able to like this other thing that's way over there that's kind of outside of both of our field of vision. By having this second point or this additional point, it might be able to at least give word to this thing that's just sort of on the cusp of both of our sort of visibility. Like having those two anchors makes us both be able to look at that and go, oh well, there's a thing happening there now.
Yeah, and I think also it's kind of embedding this idea, which I think it's maybe like the turning point, not a turning point of anthropology, which is really different on like between thinking of something and then go and see that thing in the environment. So basically, it includes so many other possibilities and things that you didn't even imagine of, and at the same time it's also create kind of like a really deep connection with the others,
mm,
because you're really like aware of what you're sharing with the others. So
mm,
by bridging all the like sensibles, all the senses and all the ideas and all the imaginary that you have connected to a certain topic or to a certain place where you're living.
mm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's literally the sense of like sharing cognition with the group, right? So like we are actually thinking in very much in this together mode as I add your map to my map and vice versa. Like we're then not only operating on this like shared map of reality, but the act of creating that together is like quite a meaningful and significant map to know that like literally a part of me is now inside of you and vice versa, and that like it's only in the togetherness that that thing is actually even possible, right?
I also really like the fact that basically, even sometimes, I'm just gonna maybe ask you what's the identity of Bruxelles, and maybe you're gonna answer me with a color, and another person is gonna answer me with an opposite color. But the nice thing is that they have relationship between the two because
Mm,
they have a contrast. So you have two polarities. So then you also have to train your brain somehow to understand that basically there are different levels and we are all living in a system that we can map, as you were saying before. So it's, well, to me, it's something I'm really passionate about.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, I mean, it's like a very exceptional state, like to so when I am sort of in this space that I think you're describing, like I feel both like I feel very smart. Like I'm a little ashamed to say it. Like I feel very smart when I have the benefit of all the people's insight around me, right? It like enriches my perspective in such a view that it's like it's I don't want to say that it's godlike, but it's totally godlike, right? You know, to just have all of this information that's normally invisible to suddenly like have that there because it's obvious to everybody else in the room. Um, hmm. And the way in
And
which these things like layer on top of each other, like all of these different perspectives where, somebody is like super sensitive to like the smell of the place, and the way that their description of that like suddenly makes me aware of something that was just way outside the ballpark of anything I'm normally considering.
yeah, and actually, it's quite funny because normally people start also to laugh about like the sensation or the images that are coming to their mind because they normally track down as like really useless information, but we are sharing so much together. We are building so many different realities all together, and it's always important to analyze it also because they have an impact. They have a great impact in our everyday life and in our social group dynamics. So
Word. Mm. So, mm, so I think I dig it. I think I dig what you're up to. I think I'm gonna like it. Um, so I'm on a teeter totter right now, or like on the edge of something there's something that feels very like firm and steady. Like like I totally feel like we could continue to like explain the shit. Right, right, like I think you get it and I get it, and like we could like totally explain it in cool and interesting ways to each other for a hot second, like. And then there's another part of me that like really wants to like jump off the edge of something and be like, well, or we could explore it, like, and see what happens, right? Mm,
as you prefer.
I don't I, I don't I don't know. I literally don't know. So I say that mostly just to try and do the thing and like play this game around disclosure so that that can then come into the field so that like Mm, ah, and this is an interesting aspect, because then it's not my thing to do something about. Then by that the virtue of that disclosure, it becomes a thing that then we have as a possibility to sort of metabolize, or grope around, or figure out what to do with, which I think is a really nice aspect of this type of game that you're describing, is that when ordinarily I'm really easily overwhelmed by like the world and all of the choices and all of the stuff that's going on. But when I can, but when we can hold this like very rich map of reality, um, like not only is my brain, are we doing that on a brain like cognitive level, but like that's the brain also includes all of the neurology, right? And so um that thing that might be too like intense for me to like actually sort of sit with and contain, like because it's sort of in this relational field, and it's being metabolized and held by your nervous system and my nervous system, then like that becomes a weight, or a burden, or a thing that like can be metabolized together, right? I can deal with it if we can deal with it, so to speak.
Yeah, it's also a matter of digging a bit. Like these things are really connected with your senses, and it's just like with your first images that it's coming to your mind without judging it. I think it's quite important because normally what happens, for example, in philosophy, a lot of times that you start to build up those huge system and you are super overwhelmed on a cognitive perspective. While from here, it's just like trying to understand what we are sharing in that moment, also under a sensitive perspective, or it's just like an instinctual perspective somehow,
Hmm.
and just try to build up a system. Also, a thing that I really like is that I train a lot myself to work with children. I was doing some years ago some anthropology lab for kids,
Cool.
and it was kind of funny because like I started with academics in my in my career, where it's always like try to put like upon concepts and contextualizing theory, where you're working a
Very
lot with your
serious
mind.
as well.
Yeah, but then when it comes to like try to make children understand the potentiality of anthropology and make also children being an anthropologist, to me it really leads to the essential part that it's something that I always like bring with me when I'm doing workshop, because I don't want to make people feel overwhelmed on a cognitive perspective,
Hmm.
but I wanted them to have a shock, a little shock, let's say, on looking at reality in another perspective, which might seem a little bit anxious sometimes because it's really digging off your stereotypes and your actual reality that you're looking. But then for having some, yeah, let's say, less some methods, some tools in order to overcome that feeling,
Hmm.
and like also try to understand reality in a super easy way somehow, which is the first way we have to approach reality when we were kids, looking at reality, experimenting it, looking at senses, interplaying with stereotypes. You know, kids, they
Hmm.
have like such a strong stereotypes because they embed like the culture. Normally they are like they have the responsibility of embedding the culture and replicating like society rules.
Yeah, that's that like outside of the womb development is to absorb and like internalize the culture, right? And all the tools and concepts and stereotypes. And what I notice about that is there's a very it's very experientially driven, right? So it's even though it's both cognitive, but it's very much a lived experience, right, of exploration. And I think when you sort of describe that, like looking and observation, right, because it's like a real, like actually trying to figure shit out, not for the sake of like, oh, I'm trying to figure out how it works so that I can like describe it, whatnot, but I'm actually trying to figure out what works, so just so that I can interface with it, right, so I can figure out what to do here.
And also it's not only reduced to the experiential part of an individual. So it's not just my feeling, but basically it's the feeling I'm sharing with the other people,
Mm.
which also reinforces it a lot. And I think it's kind of maybe it's kind of another perspective. It's just like that could be integrated into, healing practices, or just like, yeah, individual psychology that are really based on the perception of the individuals. But while here it's just like, okay, let's breathe and understand what we are creating all together.
Hmm. Hmm. And there's
Also
something
with our
about
senses.
what's that?
What we are creating together with our senses as well.
Hmm. For sure. And there's a way in which, so there's like a crossroads there, right? That I think is available. That exploratory space and the curiosity that's sort of related to that, versus that explanatory drive and the analytical drive as well. And something in particular about my ability to, like, the thing that I'm doing right now. So let's just make it very personal. So what I'm doing right now is I'm working sort of alone in the relational field between us, right? I'm over here, I'm like in my brain, I'm trying to describe the thing, like, and it's eluding me, right? I don't have the, like, it's not in the space that's like really obvious to me. It's like just adjacent. But if I could shut up for long enough, so to speak, and like just give you the bit that's like very obvious, and then we should be like, and there's something else, but I don't know anything about it. What do you know about it, Cecilia? Like, bang. Let's try that.
Okay, so what do I know about like the relationship space that you're building now? That's the question, or?
I'm not quite sure, but what I am sure about is that there's something happening. So I have a good feel for like the exploratory drive and the alternative space to that, I guess. That is
But
working
let's do
alone.
an exercise of observation, for example.
Oh,
To me, something
cool.
that shocks me a little bit is just like, have you noticed that like we both have plants behind us?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Word.
which is it's kind of funny because it's kind of like we are kind of maybe communicating something with our objects.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know, but I choose to be depicted in this way for this kind of like, yeah, relationship space, interview, whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
you decide also how to frame your space around you. So maybe you like, I mean, you know, and also we can also observe like I'm closer to the webcam, right? You're a little bit
Mm.
more long away, and
Oh
this is
yeah, yeah.
a lot of meaning that we are co-constructing, but
Hmm.
in the deep sense of co-constructing, because I mean we are building up this space
Yeah, literally,
from
right?
apparently nothing, but maybe we just like we embedded also some some rules from society on how like an interview should work.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
For
this
sure.
particular of the plant could be like also super interesting a little bit
Right.
to.
Well, there's like, and especially like this is funny, right? Because I'm a secret anthropologist. I think all humans find other humans fascinating, right? Because like humans just are super endlessly interesting, right? And so this space of like the frame of Zoom of video calls was for such a long window of time. Like that was the window into the world, into human relationships. And so I noticed I had two different particular observations. So number one is there's a type of person that has books as their background, right? I have a bookshelf over there, but that's not my background because it's like, it's not about what I know, man. What I know is the least relevant thing I can possibly imagine. And there's another type of person that I'm also not, which is the type of person who like blurs their background on video calls, right? This is a different type of human, and I always wonder, like, what are you hiding?
But you know, like on that perspective, we are always building up new languages, new practices, and we are
Mm,
making sense of a different reality. To me, it was also super fascinating to see how people like have like eye contact while they were having the calls, because
mhm.
I mean, it's not direct eye contact, but you have a sense of being with another person. You know,
Right,
you
right.
can feel maybe observed, and or also that was really fascinating to me. I started to interplay a game with some artists during the lockdown about objects. So basically, since like we were talking a lot during COVID time,
Mhm.
and we get bored somehow. So we were like thinking also about like what are like the languages, what are the narrative practices that we are using, and we started to not talk and talk only with objects for 10 minutes, that basically like they have like such a strong symbolic meaning because it was the first time, for the first time, that you are completely in the place of a person for that moment,
Mm,
you know.
right.
So it's the only moment where you can actually show your object that much. And we
Mm.
had to like build up visual rhymes with all the objects.
Yeah.
So let's say I have like here, there's my phone, it's blue, and maybe you also have a blue thing over there.
Mhm.
So, or and you can put it like in the screen, and it was so strong because when you have the same object,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
was really, yeah, you see,
Yeah. Yeah.
you were really like feeling that something was touching you somehow, you know, inherently touching you. And so it was also like a way of like opening up really intimate conversation somehow, but within objects and not only with spoken language.
Mhm. Mhm. And this is
So
and
basically, yeah, my workshop will be a lot about how we are making meanings out of
mm,
things that we take for granted, but they are not for granted. They represent
mm.
so much, they communicate so much, and also they build up our reality.
And what this reminds me of, as you described, like communicating without words, like the thing that instantly jumps into my brain is fucking dance, right? Like talking about like communication that is very significant. Like in the last year, my entire being has been blown away with like how important dance as practice thing you do as ritual it is to my body, my being, right? um oh,
You mean as a communication practice, or?
yeah, that there is like um so what you're sort of describing is like dreaming up. Yeah, so there's a very meta game thing that I think is sort of in between the lines of, I think, what you're describing is the recognition of grammar, right? The recognition of the languages that we use to communicate. And that you're describing that there's a visible grammar that has something to do with plants, and like that's part of a way of signaling that we do to, in this instance, to go, yeah, same, see, yeah, same, right? um as is there is an entirely different type of grammar in dance and movement. You know, if I think about like that like old ancient fucking probably bullshit statistic that like 70% of communication is nonverbal. Of course it is, because you know I have a body that does things and I gesture, right? I have intonation. So all of the thinking about just to make salient those different facets of grammar becomes something very interesting and really enriches the design space in terms of like, oh, how do I become cognizant of this whole different way of communicating?
Yeah, to me it's kind of fascinating on some part, because sometimes there are movements that like in every culture you could understand some senses of movement. And also it's really fascinating to me the fact that sometimes with dance also, like, you within a community you start to build up your own language that could be inherent to that community, inherent to the macro culture they belongs to. uh, so it always depends in terms of dimension, and it's really, really interesting. Also, another interesting thing is that, we constantly say that, like, communication is not only verbal. You have a lot of other narrative practices. You have a lot of other languages. You could get a lot of information from other elements. But then, like, in the really kind of rational and business world, which is basically the one which is leading all of our jobs, is really, really good in analyzing only the verbal level,
Mm-hmm.
or
What can be
even in
written,
my
the written
workshop, kind of
contract, right?
sometimes I'm really fascinating of, yeah, and I'm really fascinated about, like, the fact that in workshop people, like, just open up their eyes saying, "Oh my God, I never thought of hearing the noise and how that noise impacts my life and whatever." So it's really strong. But yeah, it's really controversial also somehow, because to me, I dig, like, the first step of my workshop are digging a lot on these things of, like, understanding sensation, just trying to observe reality that's around us. But then the second also part is just like trying also, like, to keep, like, a turn up with a scientific method, in the terms also, like, to understand that dimensions sometimes matter in terms of building up a representation of the reality that we have.
Mm.
So I think it's also a cool balance somehow, like, to understand reality, understand sensation, and understand that sensation are not only, they could be also expressed with percentages. Of course, we could
Mm-hmm.
understand a lot of things with percentages, but those percentages, those quantitative data must be integrated also, like, in order to understand reality, because otherwise they are too narrow.
Right. And which is like, this is the like endless recursion of like communication. So like, okay, all right, so how do we of course, like there's a richness to it that I think you're describing in the qualia, right? And yet how do we express those things also in a rigorous way that enables the map that you guys make over there in your context? How do I get a piece, or how do I exact something of that map into my context so that I can learn from it as well in a totally different environment, and find a piece that was there, and somehow adapt it to the needs of this context?
I normally prefer to use it, like, as a contextual solutions more than adapt one to another.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because of course there are similarities and other kind of things, but, like, to me, what I think it's more useful in order to take off all the, um, let's say, bias and moral judgment on another context,
Mm-hmm.
as moral as, say, just like, yeah, bias, like, I think that I take for granted some aspect of another environment. So sometimes when you do, for example, case studies, or you try to replicate something in another context, it's kind of hard not to have this
Right.
aspect. So I normally always like work in the other way around. So I let things to emerge. Of course, I being auto-reflexive on the sample, so on the dimension I'm analyzing, but then reconstructing a new system all the times.
And
And when I
yeah.
did it, maybe I can find similarities, but it all starts from the context.
hmm hmm And yet there's this is, I think, a very interesting point of I get a lot of, I get excited here, right? Because yes, totally context dependent, your context and my context not the same. So the thing that works super great in your context not going to fly at all over here. And yet, like, there's something around this idea of like planetary interoperability, right? That encourages me to want to learn from the things that you learn in your context, and try to like to to figure out which parts of those things, not even which parts of those things, but how can I be inspired by what works in your context and in my context, right? So it's not so much as like a copy and a paste, but like hearing a song and playing a song, right? That, okay, you're playing, and I don't actually know shit about music, even though I sing a lot. You're playing in a 3/4 time, and I'm playing in a 4/4 time. Your riff is not going to work in my timing sequence over here, and yet I can be inspired by the tradition that you're playing in, and that particular move that you just made, and I can express it in my context, in my rhythm, in my environment, in a totally different way that may totally turn into a train wreck, or might fucking work, right? But just to say, there's a source of inspiration here that gives me an opportunity to test something out and see what works.
And that's basically to me the like richness of syncretism, and of syncretism, and also of port cities, let's say.
The richness of what?
The syncretism, uh,
Synchronicity.
yeah, so syncretic things,
Hmm.
and also of port cities, let's say.
Of
I
board
was working a lot
cities.
on port, yeah, on port cities, so they have a
Ah,
harbor, and basically
yeah.
like a lot of cultures are passing by and stopping by at the harbor, which is basically a contrast with the Panama Canal or the Panama Channel, because
Mm-hmm.
like boats are not stopping by, so no syncretism at all. But where you have a port city like Buenos Aires, Valparaiso, Lisboa, a lot of those cities, how it's called, a lot of cities and stuff. The cool thing is that basically the fact of having so many people passing by, internet is working, okay. The fact of having so many people passing by, it's super interesting because that's basically things. They got inspired on different things, on different ways of perceiving reality, or on doing some practices that could be from art practices to way of perceiving relationships or whatever, and they do syncretism because then they create a new reality, and they merge up with something which is completely, it's not completely new, but could appear completely new, but
Mm-hmm.
it's coming from two different streams. So that's
Yeah.
basically what culture is about.
Exactly. And so coming back to like the context of Regens Unite, there's two things. So number one is the cross-pollination that you're sort of describing, like, yes, that, and the way in which that cross-pollination from a cultural perspective is like the way in which DNA sort of recombines and and delivers novelty, right? And it's in that novelty that we are the intersection between these two different things. That's, this song and this song make a baby song together, and it's that explosion of novelty that also gets me really excited as I think about like the vast amount of like really complex shit that is like coming down the pipeline, and like, how do I deal with all of this crap? I go, oh man, well, you gotta fight novelty with novelty. It's like we're just gonna like smash all of the ideas together, all of the traditions, all of the ways together. Not to say that like this is the way. I notice I'm really cautious with this. I've become a neo-perennialist unexpectedly. Like, not in the sense that I when I think about like the perennial traditions, like the ancient traditions, I don't have a relationship, unfortunately, with those. But what I do have a relationship with is a tradition that I've been practicing quite diligently with for a good long window of time, which feels to me like a totally new thing as a fucking generalist, right? Somebody who's just like following their curiosity and interests around like butterflies, chasing butterflies, to have found a way and to have stuck with a way for a longer period of time. But coming back to the point, novelty. So the explosion of novelty and how that might give us the sort of evolutionary advantage that like the species might require to deal with extraordinary times, to put it lightly.
But also, as you were saying about cross-pollination, the fact is combining cross-pollination with reflexivity from the anthropological point of view just gives you then forms of culture that are not decontextualized, It's not like real like capitalism and globalization that just like try to put in a box things together without even knowing their historical context,
Right.
or just like one thing out of the blue is connected with these other things out of the blue, which I'm reading an historical fact without even contextualizing that intellectual perspective in that time, for example, but without a reflexivity. The fact is that you're deeping going to cross-pollination, creating something with a deep connection. So
yeah, it is that deep connection, right? There's a particular like, what is it about that deep connection? Because it enriches, right? So if I just take the point that is now, right, and the now compresses all of the richness of experience, right, into like the head of the wave, the crest of the wave, so to speak. And for sure, I think there is, speaking about bias and speaking about stereotypes, I think that's the same compression of information into what is useful right here in this point. I take all of that vast richness and I simplify it to this thing. There is utility in that can work. But when I have the capacity and the opportunity to open my senses up to all of like the story of how we came to the crest of the wave, right? There is a source of even more inspiration than the crest of the wave has to offer, right? I can look at all of those things and be inspired by every little which way that the path the water took to get to here. Yeah, I like that. I'm happy with that one. Thank you. That's good vibes, Cecilia.
So how are your plans?
My plans, I mean, I, what do you mean?
No, your plans,
Oh,
your
my
plans, your last
plants.
plans.
Yeah. How are my plants? Oh yeah, like I've had this plant since I moved into this place. I got it it's almost as old as my son is. And it's very happy. It's had good times, bad times, but it's still alive and kicking. And everything I put in that space just grows really well. I don't know what it is. There's something about that part of the house that must have the best vibe of the whole house. You know, I could take a plant that's like on its last legs, put it there, and it just goes. Yeah.
Crazy jungle.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, um, I think this is going to be a good game, Cecilia. You might break my streak. I was successful last year at Regens Unite Brussels in not participating in any of the sessions, um, just so that I could sort of hang out in the liminal space in between all of the things happening, and sort of like live vicariously through all the people that were coming from each space to another. But I want to play your game. So
Ah.
mhm, mhm,
Nice to
mhm.
hear that, though.
Yeah, cool, cool. Hmm. Well, is there anything else?
But I think I described more or less like the vibes, what we are going to do, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah, cool. So, of course, the thing we're talking about is this Regens Unite here in Brussels, on the 26th and 27th of May at Citizens Corner, which is going to be live. It's going to be a bunch of regens. Um, hmm, ah, so playing with, you know, the cross pollination of exploration of perspectives, the reflexivity, and one of the aspects that I'm always excited about is polarity, right? To bring the polarities, especially around stereotypes together, and to give them the opportunity to sort of meet their counterpart in a way in which is totally outside of both of their domains. And so, they might actually be able to meet in some like in a way in which disarms the stereotypes, and then might have the create the intimacy to reveal them to one another. No.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if we're lucky, if if the spirit is willing. Hmm. Cool. Dope, Cecilia. I'm gonna push a button. I'm gonna say wish everybody good night. Go fuck
Yeah,
off.
wish every yeah. I'm looking forward to see you in Regens Unite in Brussels. It's gonna be great. And I'm also looking forward to hear your perspective, let's
Hmm,
say.
for sure. There is one question that I think, that I would like to get your take on, or to inspire you to inspire others, perhaps, is especially around that topic of polarities. Are there any particular polarities that you think are sort of like alive in your observation of the anthropological observation of sort of the now, that you think would be particularly interesting to sort of explore and see represented in this space? Like,
In
if you could,
Regens Unite, I mean?
yeah, like, if there are there any polarities that, like, if you had so let's just say you had like a superpower to like call the polarities into being, to hang out and do this, play this game with you. Are there any, which are the ones that you would say, oh yeah, like those show up definitely?
I mean, I can recall a little bit my experience in the Regens Unite where I've been participating in Berlin
Mm-hmm,
in September or last year. Because as I said, I always have like really like to um, be reflexive on the sensation I have and not too much speculating. But
mm-hmm,
to me, the polarities I've been seeing a lot in the last event were maybe like tech people with spiritual people, let's
mm-hmm,
say,
mm-hmm,
and I try to find and maybe a third polarity is it's also activism, where I saw like really different kind of languages and like ideas and also like means. And so I think that could be a really important starting point in order to understand how to develop a common narrative that includes everybody.
Mm,
That's
word.
something that you expected, or
Yeah, no, this is cool. So it's funny, right? Again, I have like the classic set that I'm sort of that are very visible to me. And it's a different set that you bring in that I go, oh yeah, but for sure, those are there. Those are very there, right? Mm, mm, mm.
and also to me it was really interesting, like to see um, so many different people from different nationalities, and a cool thing that we've been doing also last edition, it was like before starting everything, it was this exercise on trying to think upon the stereotypes that other people are giving to us normally.
Mhm.
And I find it really fascinating because there were people like talking about, like, for example, I have an Italian accent, so when I'm talking, it just like people reminds of movies, for example, so they don't listen to me, uh, or other kind of things. And it was kind of really interesting to me to see like also geopolitical conflicts running by and expressing different polarities.
Hmm.
Uh, so it was also like a part of the meeting that makes you also reflect upon like all the taboos and the traumas that we have like to be aware of, and somehow to start to talk about in order to find inherently regenerative solutions. So I saw a lot of polarities, and let's say more than polarities, different kind of positioning between different conversations. And I find it really interesting because that's like a starting point for a deep contamination of concepts, and in order also to understand how we can be like more like how we can comprehend more points of view and make something out of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amen. This is the way. This is the vibe. This is the vibe, Cecilia. So
it.
awesome. Well, this is Cecilia. Come fucking hang out. I hope to see you at Regens Unite in Brussels so we can play good games.
Yeah, definitely. So see you in Brussels, though.
All right. Go.